He was just a single dad playing guitar on a rainy street corner doing his best to raise his daughter with music and hope. But that day, when a woman in heels stopped, stared, and whispered, "You sang to me," in 1999, everything began to change. If you love heartwarming stories about second chances, unexpected connections, and the quiet power of kindness, make sure to subscribe so you don't miss the next story. Now, let's begin. Single dad played guitar on the street. A woman stopped and whispered, "You sang to me," in 1999. The first notes drifted through the crisp Portland air like a memory. Jack Morrison sat on a worn milk crate near the corner of Hawthorne, and 39th fingers strumming his old acoustic guitar, the wood dulled by time and weather. A cardboard sign sat at his feet, just a dad and a song. "Thank you." Next to it, a small open case contained only a few crumpled bills and coins, and nestled beside it was a little girl of about 8, gently clapping along a knit hat pulled low over her ears. Jack's voice rose slowly deeply, a sound that didn't beg for attention but commanded it anyway. He sang Fields of Gold, and though 1,000 people passed him each day without so much as a glance, today was different. From across the street, Evelyn Hartman stopped mid-step, nearly spilling her latte. Her breath caught. That voice, it was impossible. But it was him. Or at least, it was that voice. She turned sharply and crossed the street, her heels tapping like tiny echoes from the past. Jack didn't look up. He rarely did. He kept playing, watching the rhythm of Lila's little hands, pretending it didn't matter that most passers-by didn't notice him, pretending he hadn't once dreamed of concert halls and spotlight stages. Evelyn stood still right in front of him, eyes wide, lips parted. People moved around her like water around stone. Jack reached the final chorus. His voice broke slightly on the line. "You'll remember me when the west wind moves," and it wasn't from the cold. When the last note faded, Jack looked up to thank whoever might have paused and saw her. She didn't speak right away. Her face was pale but flushed, as though fighting something inside. Then, barely louder than a whisper, she said, "You sang to me in 1999. Jack blinked, confused. "I'm sorry." She reached into her coat pocket and pulled out a $100 bill. She folded it once, twice, then slid it into the case. "You probably don't remember, but I do. You saved my life." And then, before he could respond, before he could ask what she meant, she turned and walked away, her coat billowing behind her like a ghost, turning back into fog. Lila looked up. Who was that Daddy Jack stared down the street where the woman had vanished? I don't know. Later that evening, back in their tiny basement apartment above a laundromat, Jack leaned the guitar against the wall. The room was dimly lit and cluttered with crayons, thrift store books, and takeout containers. Lila lay on her stomach, coloring a picture of a princess holding a guitar. "Daddy," she said without looking up, "do you think that lady was an angel?" He gave a dry chuckle. "No, sweetie. Angels don't wear Prada heels. She said you saved her." "How, I don't know," Jack muttered, still holding the folded $100 bill in his hand. His thumb brushed over the faint scent of lavender from the woman's perfume. He unfolded the bill absent-mindedly and froze. In tiny, graceful handwriting curled in the corner were the words, "You don't know it, but your song brought me back. E." That night, after Lila had fallen asleep beside a stuffed elephant with one missing eye, Jack sat by the window with the guitar in his lap. He didn't play. He didn't move. He just stared out into the misty street below where headlights made ghosts of the rain. 1999. He hadn't thought about that year in forever. Seattle. The Greyhound station. The corner near Pike Place where he used to play for crowds that never stopped, where he'd drown his loneliness in lyrics. He remembered singing "You Are Not Alone" on New Year's Eve. Not because he believed it, but because he needed to hear it himself. That night had been bitter cold. He'd played until his fingers went numb. No one had listened, at least he thought they hadn't. Could it be her? He'd never seen her face. Never noticed anyone that night. He was barely holding himself together. After losing his dad in a construction accident and then getting a letter that his then-girlfriend had moved on, music was the only thing left. Jack sighed, pressing his palm flat over the guitar's worn body like an old friend. What were the odds? People didn't come back after 25 years to say thank you, unless they'd never forgotten. The next morning, Jack returned to his spot on Hawthorne a little earlier than usual. His fingers trembled slightly as he tuned the guitar. He kept scanning the crowd, not even sure who he was looking for. Her coat had been tan, her hair dark and pulled back. A face carved from memory, if memory had sculpted angels with tired eyes. Lila skipped beside him holding a warm muffin. "Play the song again, Daddy?" He strummed the opening chord to Fields of Gold again. As the notes rose once more into the morning light, Jack sang, not for the money, not for the crowd, but for the mystery, for the woman who remembered, and for a night long ago when he'd sung for himself and unknowingly kept someone else from stepping over the edge. And though he didn't know her name, Jack had a strange, unshakable feeling that the story between them hadn't ended. It had just begun. The cafe on the corner had just started brewing its first batches when Jack ducked inside, guitar slung over one shoulder and the smell of early rain clinging to his jacket. He rarely came in here, coffee cost more than he could justify, but this morning something pulled him out of routine. Maybe it was the folded bill in his pocket. Maybe it was the way her voice echoed in his head. "You sang to me in 1999. He ordered a drip coffee black and took a seat near the window where he could still see his usual street corner. He didn't pull out his phone, he didn't own one that worked anyway, and instead reached for the guitar case and gently opened it. The bill was still there, tucked in a side pocket where Lila couldn't find it and ask questions. His thumb brushed the writing again. "You don't know it, but your song brought me back." He folded the bill carefully and tucked it into his wallet as if storing away a piece of his past. The rain picked up around midday, cutting short his usual street performance. Jack packed up and walked Lila home from school. She chattered about a boy in her class who had eaten glue on a dare and how her music teacher said she had perfect pitch. She beamed as she said it, skipping over Puddle's yellow backpack bouncing behind her. Jack smiled, but his thoughts were somewhere else. He hadn't thought about that night in decades, not really, and yet now it tugged at him like a melody he couldn't get out of his head. Once they got home and Lila settled in with her coloring books, Jack opened the old cedar box he kept beneath the bed. Inside were a handful of relics from a life he'd boxed up: sheet music stained with old coffee rings, a broken tuner, a photo of him on stage at a dive bar in Tacoma, back when his hair was thicker, his eyes less tired. And there, at the bottom, folded in 4, was the busking permit from Seattle, issued December 1999. His breath caught. Back then, Jack had just turned 20. The world had felt raw and endless, like an open wound wrapped in promise. He'd arrived in Seattle with a guitar, a duffel bag, and the belief that if he just played his heart out, someone would hear him. He had played near Pike Place almost every evening. Some nights he barely made enough for dinner. Others he felt like the city was his symphony. But New Year's Eve was different. He remembered it vividly now. The cold bit through his jacket. His hands were shaking not just from the weather but from what he'd lost. 2 days before he'd gotten the call. His dad was gone. A scaffold collapsed on a job site. Just like that, the one person who'd never stopped believing in him was gone. His ex had sent him a voicemail that same day. She was engaged. "It's time we both moved on," she'd said. Jack hadn't cried. He didn't have room for it. He went to the corner and played anyway because that was the only way he knew how to stay upright. That night he sang, "You Are Not Alone," over and over. Not for anyone else, but for himself. He didn't remember seeing a single face in the crowd. And yet, someone had been there. That night, Jack sat beside Lila's bed after reading her 2 chapters from a book about space dogs. She was already half asleep, her hand curled under her cheek. He tucked the blanket up to her chin and turned off the light, then wandered back to the kitchen. He poured himself a glass of water, then stared out the window into the wet night. What kind of pain must she have been in that night? For a song to pull her back from the edge, he didn't know her name. Didn't know what she'd gone through, but he knew what it felt like to be one chord away from breaking. The next day, Jack returned to the street with a different posture. He wore his better flannel, the one without the frayed cuffs, and brushed Lila's hair twice before they left the apartment. He tuned his guitar, carefully choosing his set list with a quiet reverence. No showmanship, just truth. And somewhere in the crowd of strangers he hoped her face might appear again. She didn't, but someone else noticed. A man in a suit dropped a 20 into the case and said, "You sound like someone who used to believe in something." Jack smiled faintly. Maybe I still do. Later that evening, while folding laundry in their tiny living room, Jack found one of Lila's drawings crumpled beneath the couch. It showed 3 figures: a man with a guitar, a little girl, and a woman with long hair and bright eyes. Above them, in shaky first-grade handwriting, were the words, "Family means singing together." He held the paper for a long time. There had been a time Jack believed in fate, that some things found their way back if they were meant to. He hadn't believed that in a long while. But now there was a whisper of something, a voice from 1999, and a story that might not be finished yet. The following Saturday brought sunlight to Portland for the first time in days. Jack set up in his usual spot early, hoping the warmth might bring out more foot traffic and maybe the woman from last week. He kept glancing up between verses, half hoping she'd materialize like a song you only hear in dreams. He played "Carolina in My Mind," followed by "Fire and Rain," then shifted into one of his own, an old melody he hadn't played in over a decade, one written when he was 20 and everything still felt possible. As he strummed the last chord, a familiar voice came from the side. That one. "Was yours, wasn't it?" Jack turned. She was there. Evelyn Hartman stood in a navy trench coat, her hands tucked deep in the pocket sunglasses perched atop her head. She looked polished, like she had just stepped out of a boardroom. But her eyes, those were softer now, less guarded. Jack cleared his throat. "Yeah. I wrote that when I still thought I'd make it." A ghost of a smile played on her lips. "You did. You just didn't know how." They stood in silence, the kind that stretches only when 2 people both want to say something but don't know where to start. Around them, the city moved on buses, sighing at red lights, cyclists weaving through pedestrians, life unfolding like always. Jack finally said, "I never got your name." "Evelyn," she replied. "Evelyn Hartman. I'm Jack, and the whirlwind over there." He nodded to Lila, who was sitting cross-legged on the sidewalk feeding bits of muffin to a pigeon, "is my daughter Lila." Evelyn bent down, careful not to crease her coat. "Nice to meet you, Lila. You must be the best roadie in the business." Lila grinned. "I carry the stickers and guard the tip jar." Jack chuckled, easing into the moment. "She also critiques my song choices." Brutally. Evelyn looked back at Jack, her tone softening. "I'm hosting a community fundraiser next weekend. It's small, just some local artists and folks from the neighborhood. But we're trying to raise support for a youth arts program we're starting downtown." Jack nodded politely, unsure where this was going. "I'd like you to perform," she continued. "I'll pay you. Not much, but more than the sidewalk pays." He hesitated. "I'm not asking for charity," she added quickly. "You have something people need to hear. Something real." Jack exhaled slowly. "I haven't played a venue in 15 years. This isn't a venue," she said. "It's a neighborhood gym with folding chairs and bad lighting. But there'll be people. People who listen." Lila looked up at her dad. "Can I come?" Jack looked between the 2 of them. His first instinct was to say no, to stay on his sidewalk with his predictable rhythms and low stakes. But something about Evelyn's face, about the way her voice trembled just slightly on people who listen, made him nod. "All right," he said. "We'll be there. The gym smelled faintly of floor polish and popcorn. Jack hadn't stepped into a place like this since high school, but Evelyn had transformed the space string lights draped across the ceiling, folding chairs lined up in uneven rows, a modest wooden stage with a single spotlight, and a banner that read, "Create Again, an evening of art and hope." Backstage, if you could call it that, Jack tuned his guitar while Lila clung to his arm. "Are you nervous?" she whispered. "A little." Why, Jack glanced down at her. "Because sometimes, when you've been quiet too long, it's scary to let people hear you again." She nodded solemnly and hugged him. "You sound best when you sing for just one person. Maybe tonight just pretend there's only one." He smiled, tousled her hair. "That's the best advice I've ever gotten." When it was his turn, Jack stepped onto the stage, heart thudding in his chest. The lights blinded him briefly, but then he saw her Evelyn standing near the back arms, crossed face unreadable. He took a deep breath and began. First, Sweet Baby James, then Angel from Montgomery. His fingers moved with memory. His voice wove through the air, steady and low, and the room grew still. Then, without meaning to, he began a song he hadn't sung since the night his world cracked open. "You Are Not Alone." He didn't announce it, just let the chords spill out raw and reverent. He sang slower than usual, as if savoring each word, his voice gravel-soft and full of ache. And near the end, his eyes found Evelyn's. She wasn't just listening. She was crying. After the show, he found her standing by the water cooler, dabbing her eyes with a tissue. "You sang that song," she said almost accusingly. Jack nodded. "I did. That was the one. I thought it might be." Silence. Then Evelyn took a step closer. "I didn't come tonight because I organized it. I came because I wanted to see if it still felt the same, if you still felt the same." Jack met her gaze, and she looked away for a moment, then back. "It felt like someone opened a door I thought had been locked forever." Jack looked down, absorbing her words. "Thank you for singing it again," she added. "Thank you for remembering." On the way home, Lila leaned against his arm in the back seat of Evelyn's car. She had insisted on giving them a ride. "Did you see all the people listening?" she murmured. "Yeah," Jack replied. "I saw them, but I only sang for one." He smiled in the darkness. So did Evelyn, quietly at the wheel. Somehow, without quite realizing it, they were no longer strangers. They were part of the same unfinished song. Jack couldn't sleep. It was past midnight, and the apartment was still except for the low hum of the old fridge. Lila had drifted off hours ago, curled around her stuffed elephant like a lighthouse, keeping him from sinking too deep into thought. But his mind, his heart was restless. He sat at the kitchen table with a cup of chamomile tea. He'd long since stopped sipping, staring at the flyer from the fundraiser still crumpled in his coat pocket. Create again. The phrase rattled around inside him like a wind chime during a storm. Her face had haunted him ever since that night. Not just her eyes, red-rimmed and shimmering in the dim gym light, but the truth behind them. There was something Evelyn wasn't saying, and he didn't want to push. But it was there, tangled up in her silence, and in the way she'd cried during that song, the song from 1999. He hadn't even meant to sing it. His hands had moved on their own, his voice rising as if some piece of himself long buried had reached for the surface at just the right moment. Now it wouldn't go back under. 2 days later, a thick envelope appeared in Jack's guitar case after a set on the corner. He found it after Lila had already started counting their change. "Daddy, there's no name," she said, eyes wide. "Just this." Inside was a handwritten note on linen stationery. "I didn't know how to tell you before, but I think you deserve to know. I'm ready now. E." Below the note was a folded piece of paper, a flyer from the University of Washington, dated December 31st, 1999. On it, circled in blue ink, was a single-event New Year's Eve candlelight vigil for survivors of loss, 9 p.m., Red Square. Jack turned it over. Scribbled in the corner was, "I was on my way to end it, but your voice stopped me." He wasn't sure what made him call, But that night, with Lila asleep and his guitar untouched for the first time in days, Jack picked up the community center flyer and dialed the number scribbled in the corner. "Hello." Her voice was calm, but not casual. It held that same vulnerable poise he'd noticed the first time they met. "Evelyn, it's Jack." A pause. "Then I was hoping you'd call. I got your note. I'm sorry it took me so long," she said. "I've practiced telling the story 100 times, but it never sounded right until now." "You don't have to tell me." "I want to," she said softly. "Could we meet somewhere quiet?" The old library near Laurelhurst Park was Evelyn's suggestion. They met at a bench tucked in the reading garden where the scent of rain still lingered on the stones. Evelyn wore a forest green coat and no makeup. She looked younger somehow, or maybe just more real. Jack didn't speak first. He waited. "I was 19, she began. A freshman, smart, driven, terrified of failure. My mom had passed from ovarian cancer 3 months before. I was unraveling, but I didn't show it. I smiled. I got good grades. I dated the right guy. She looked up at him. He left me on Christmas Eve. Said I was too heavy to carry anymore." Jack winced. Evelyn continued. "I didn't tell anyone. I packed up my coat, my mom's scarf, and walked out into the city on New Year's Eve. I didn't know where I was going. I just knew I didn't want to keep going." Jack swallowed, throat tight. "I ended up near the water. The park was almost empty. And then I heard it. A voice. Singing. Jack's heart beat louder with every word. You were standing near the fountain," she said. "I couldn't see your face. But the sound—" She broke off for a moment. It was like someone had reached across time and said, "Wait, just wait a little longer." He finally found his voice. "I had no idea." She nodded. "Of course you didn't. I didn't leave a note. I didn't cry. I just sat there for an hour, listening. And then I went back to campus. I found a grief group the next week. Eventually, I started building something again." Jack leaned forward. "And now I run a company that funds art and healing programs. You'd be surprised how many people never recover from silence." She smiled, not bitterly, just gently. "I never forgot your voice, Jack. I just didn't know how to find it again until I saw you on that street corner." He nodded slowly. "I was just trying to survive." "You were doing more than that," Evelyn said. "You were giving people something to hold on to." They sat in silence, the kind that didn't ask for more words. Just the presence of truth shared between two people who'd walked to the edge of something once and stepped back. Before they parted, Evelyn turned to him and said, "I want to help you, Jack. And not just with gigs. I want to help you build something. A real space. For music. For people like me. Like you." Jack raised an eyebrow. "You barely know me." "I know enough," she said, holding his gaze. "You saved me without knowing me at all. Let me do the same for you with your permission this time." He was quiet for a long time, then said, "Let me think about it." "I'll be here," she said simply. "Whatever you decide." She walked away, but the feeling she left behind didn't. It lingered like a note still ringing long after the music had stopped. And Jack, for the first time in years, realized something extraordinary. He might not be alone anymore. Not in song. And maybe not in life. Rain drummed lightly on the window of Jack's apartment as he dried dishes one by one more for the comfort of routine than necessity. Lila sat at the small kitchen table working through her math homework with a chewed pencil and an exaggerated sigh every few minutes. Outside, the Portland sky glowed pewter clouds, thick and unmoving. Jack's phone buzzed on the counter. It didn't buzz often, only a few people had his number. He picked it up and saw a message from Evelyn. "Would you and Lila like to come see the studio space this weekend? No pressure, just a walkthrough. I'll bring coffee. E." He stared at the message for a long time. No pressure. Jack dried his hands and set the phone down without replying. The studio was a modest brick building nestled between a plant nursery and a community food co-op. It had once been a dance hall. Evelyn explained, though its best years were far behind it. Peeling paint, dust-choked corners, old fixtures that hummed with history. Still, something about the place felt awake. Jack walked the perimeter slowly, guitar case in hand, while Lila darted from room to room like a bee in spring. "This place smells like old music," she said. Evelyn smiled. "That's probably the ghosts of 1970s wedding bands." Jack stood near the stage, a shallow platform with creaking floorboards and tangled cords. He could almost hear echoes of drums' laughter, maybe even heartbreak. "I want to turn this into something real," Evelyn said beside him. "A performance space. But not just that. A teaching hub. A recording room. A place where people like you, people who've carried music through hardship, can pass it on." Jack raised an eyebrow. "People like me?" Evelyn tilted her head. "You play music that makes people stop. You survived life without giving up your voice. That's not nothing." He looked around again. "I'm not a teacher. I don't know the first thing about running a place like this." "You know how to show up," she said. "You know how to listen. The rest we can figure out together." Jack shook his head slightly, unsure whether it was disbelief or caution taking over. "Evelyn, I appreciate what you're trying to do, but my life doesn't work like yours. I'm not offering a rescue," she said gently. "I'm offering a partnership." Silence stretched between them, filled only by the sound of Lila's feet thudding on the upstairs loft. "I can't afford to chase dreams," he said finally. "I'm not asking you to chase anything," she replied. "Just walk with it a while, see where it leads." Back at home, Jack spent the rest of the evening rearranging thoughts he didn't want to admit he was entertaining. What would it look like to have four walls and a roof that welcomed him not as a tenant, but as a musician again? Could he teach? Could he lead something? Could he trust that this offer wasn't just charity wrapped in idealism? Lila was unusually quiet at bedtime. "Are you mad at Evelyn?" she asked as he tucked her in. Jack sat on the edge of her bed. "No, sweetheart. Why would I be? You didn't smile when she talked about the music place." He sighed. "It's not that simple." "She makes you quiet," Lila said, "but not sad quiet. Thinking quiet." Jack chuckled. "You pick up on everything, don't you?" She nodded gravely. "Well," he said, brushing hair from her forehead, "I guess she makes me wonder if I stopped dreaming too soon." Layla yawned. "Dreams don't disappear. They just wait until you're brave again." The next afternoon, Evelyn came by the street corner while Jack was setting up. He didn't expect her, she hadn't messaged, but she came without ceremony holding 2 coffees and a pastry bag. "You looked like you could use fuel," she said. He took the cup gratefully. "You always show up with caffeine. It's my love language." They stood side by side in silence as he tuned his guitar. Then Evelyn said, "I know I came on strong yesterday." Jack shook his head. "You were honest. I respect that." But he glanced toward Lila, who was dancing slowly to a tune he hadn't started playing yet. "I've spent years making sure her life stayed safe, predictable. Taking a leap now, it feels selfish." Evelyn turned to him, serious. "What if it's the opposite?" Jack blinked. "What if showing her you can still dream, even after everything, is the safest thing you could teach her?" That night, after Lila fell asleep, Jack pulled out his old notebook. The cover was frayed, the pages yellowed. Inside were lyrics he'd written in coffee shops, alleys, motel rooms, fragments of a life he never finished living. He flipped to a blank page and wrote. Not a song, not yet, but a list. "What I know, music matters, Lila believes in me. Evelyn isn't going away. What I don't know, if I'm ready, if I'm still enough, if I can risk opening the door." He stared at the last line. Then beneath it wrote, "What if I already have?" The next morning, Jack sent Evelyn a message. "I'll try. Not because I'm sure, but because I want to be." Her reply came only a minute later. "That's all I ever hoped for." And just like that, the corner of Jack's life that had been stuck in place began to shift. Not because someone gave him a stage, but because someone finally saw the stage that had always been there, hidden beneath dust, waiting to be lit. The first time Lila stood on a stage, it wasn't planned. It was a gray Saturday morning, the kind where Portland looked like it was wrapped in a damp wool blanket. Jack had brought her to the community center with the intention of helping Evelyn sort through audio cables and folding chairs. The renovation work on the studio hadn't started yet, but Evelyn had begun hosting small weekend workshops for neighborhood kids in the meantime, music art, storytelling, whatever helped them make noise and feel heard. Jack thought he and Lila would just be background noise. He hadn't expected her to volunteer. "She's welcome to join," Evelyn had said, smiling down at Lila, who was tugging shyly on her dad's coat. Jack knelt beside his daughter. "Are you sure?" Lila gave a small nod. "If I sing, will you listen?" "Always," he said. The workshop was being led by a local music teacher named Jose, who strummed his ukulele and spoke to the kids like they were all future Grammy winners. Jack sat off to the side with a coffee, Evelyn beside him. Legs crossed clipboard, balanced on her knee, but her eyes rarely left the children. Then Jose clapped his hands and said, "Okay, anyone feel brave enough to share something?" Lila raised her hand before Jack could stop her. And then she stood. Jack's breath hitched. She climbed the 2 short steps to the platform stage, no microphone, just a room of mismatched chairs and patient faces. She took a deep breath, closed her eyes, and sang. It was a lullaby. One Jack had sung to her countless times when she was little, when she was sick or scared of thunder, or just needed to hear her mother's memory echo in a melody. But now it wasn't Jack's voice. It was hers, clear, soft, steady. A little girl's voice in a big room, reaching out into space as if to say, "I'm here. I belong here too." By the second line, no one was talking. By the chorus, Evelyn had lowered her clipboard. By the end, Jack was no longer breathing. When Lila opened her eyes again, the silence was deeper than applause. Then someone clapped Jose, then another parent, then Evelyn, and the room erupted into something so much bigger than sound. It was pride, awe, healing. Lila walked back down, cheeks flushed, and ran straight into her father's arms. Jack held her tighter than he meant to. "You didn't tell me you'd been practicing," he whispered. She shrugged against him. "I wanted it to be a surprise." Evelyn crouched beside them. "That was beautiful, Lila. You have a gift." Lila smiled shyly. "My daddy gave it to me." Later, after the kids had left and the center grew quiet, Evelyn asked Jack to stay behind. They sat in the back room folding art supplies and emptying juice boxes into the trash. A comfortable stillness grew between them. "Your daughter has more than a good voice," Evelyn said. "She has presence. She made that whole room believe." "She gets that from her mom," Jack replied. Evelyn looked at him softly. "She gets a lot from you, too." He sighed. "I've always tried to keep her safe. That was all I knew how to do. But now," he glanced toward the empty stage, "she wants to shine. I don't know how to help her with that." Evelyn smiled. Maybe helping her shine isn't about directing the light. Maybe it's just about not standing in the way. That night, as Jack tucked Lila into bed, she asked, "Did I do okay?" "You did more than okay," Jack said. "You sang from your heart. That's more than most adults ever manage." She blinked at him through the soft glow of her bedside lamp. "Do you think Mommy heard me?" Jack nodded, his throat thick. "I think she never stopped." Jack stood by the window long after Lila fell asleep, guitar slung over his shoulder, not playing, just holding it. He thought of that moment on stage, of the way Lila had sung the song he used to whisper through his own heartbreak. Somehow, in her hands, it had become something whole, something hopeful. She wasn't just his reason to keep going. She was starting to become her own reason. The following weekend, Evelyn invited Jack and Lila to dinner. It was the first time he'd ever been to her home, a modern townhome tucked near Mount Tabor, full of warm lighting open shelves with ceramic mugs and a grand piano near the window. It wasn't showy. It was thoughtful. Evelyn cooked herself rosemary chicken roasted vegetables, a chocolate tart that made Lila beam with a mouthful of sugar. After dinner, they sat on the floor with mugs of tea while Lila played quietly with Evelyn's golden retriever. "She reminds me of myself," Evelyn said, watching Lila. Jack glanced at her. "She's a little force of nature. No, I mean, the way she looks for light, even when it's hard." Jack said nothing. Then Evelyn turned to him and asked, "Do you ever regret it? Regret what, choosing the hard road? Letting go of music for a while?" He exhaled slow and deep. "Some days, yes. But then, I look at her, and I know every detour led me somewhere worth being." She nodded. "I've spent years building things, companies, teams, campaigns, but none of them ever looked at me the way your daughter looked at you today." Jack didn't reply right away. Then softly, "That look is all I ever needed." When they left Lila asleep in Jack's arms, Evelyn stood at the door a moment longer than she had to. Jack looked back and said almost offhand, "Thanks for giving her that stage." Evelyn smiled. She took it. "I just turned on the light." As the door closed behind them, Jack felt something shift. Not just in the air, in his bones, in his future, in the realization that maybe he wasn't just raising a daughter anymore. He was beginning to raise hope. And it was learning how to sing. The days grew longer, the city shifting into a tentative spring. Pink blossoms clung to tree branches like shy promises, and the air tasted faintly of renewal. Jack found himself back at the community center most afternoons, helping paint walls, unpack donated instruments, and rearrange chairs that never stayed aligned. He and Evelyn had begun to move like two people on either side of something unsaid. The closeness was there, easy, warm, familiar, but underneath was a layer neither dared to name. Still, there were looks. Glances held a second too long. Conversations that danced along the edges of something more. But Jack was cautious. He'd lost too much by assuming too early. And Evelyn, she was still holding part of herself back. It was Jose who planted the first seed of truth. They were loading percussion kits into the back closet when he said, "She trusts you." Jack paused. Evelyn Jose nodded. "She doesn't let people in. Not since, well, not for as long as I've known her." Jack lifted a box of maracas. Because of what happened in college, Jose looked up surprised. "She told you," Jack shrugged. "Some of it." Jose leaned against the doorframe. "There's more. There always is." Jack waited. "She started this whole program after a young singer she mentored overdosed 2 years ago," Jose said quietly. "She blamed herself. Said if she'd checked in more, pushed harder, seen the signs, maybe the girl would still be here." Jack exhaled slowly. "That's a heavy thing to carry." "She carries it anyway," Jose said. "Buried in work. Buried in silence." Jack stared down at the floor. Silence. The thing they both knew too well. That evening, Jack sat alone in the nearly finished studio. The walls were painted a soft dusk blue, now the air filled with the faint scent of wood polish and potential. He strummed gently on his guitar, just enough to hear the notes echo across the empty room. Evelyn arrived without knocking, her coat dusted with cherry blossom petals. "You always play when no one's here," she said softly. Jack smiled. "Old habit. Music's easier without an audience." She walked in arms folded. "But what about when the audience is safe?" He looked up at her. "Are you?" That stopped her. "I don't know," she admitted, "but I want to be." She stepped closer, standing now just a few feet away. The overhead lights cast her face in soft shadows, and something about her posture had shifted, no longer poised, no longer polished. Just a woman standing in the truth of her uncertainty. "Why didn't you tell me about the girl?" Jack asked gently. Evelyn lowered her gaze. Because I didn't know if I could say it without breaking. He set the guitar aside. You don't have to be unbreakable. I'm supposed to be the one who holds everything together, she said, voice trembling. The fixer. The strong one. If I fall apart, what's left? Jack stood. What's left, he said quietly, is someone real. Someone human. Evelyn's eyes shimmered unshed tears blinking against lashes she didn't bother to hide. She was 17, she whispered. Brilliant. Stubborn. I saw so much of myself in her. But I missed the signs. I missed everything. She called me the night before, but I didn't pick up. Jack stepped closer. You've helped more people than you know, he said. And maybe that one loss. Maybe it broke you open enough to reach the rest of us. Evelyn met his gaze. That's what terrifies me. That the only way I'm any good is if I stay broken. He shook his head. No. You're good because you keep choosing to show up, even when it hurts. Silence stretched between them again, but this time it wasn't heavy. It wasn't empty. It was full of everything they didn't need to say. Later, Jack walked her to her car. The street was quiet lamps glowing in soft pools of amber. Evelyn paused with her hand on the door. Thank you, she said. For what? For not looking away. Jack's voice was gentle. I couldn't. I see you, Evelyn, even in your silence. She hesitated, then leaned forward and placed a soft, brief kiss on his cheek. It lingered longer than it should have. And then she slipped into the car, pulling away down the street like a melody just out of reach. At home, Jack found Lila asleep in his bed, the TV still flickering with an old cartoon on mute. He sat beside her and watched her breathe, her chest rising and falling in the steady rhythm of someone whose world still felt whole. He thought about Evelyn, about the girl she lost, about the girl he was raising. He thought about how grief and hope sometimes came from the same place, and then he picked up his guitar and began to write. Not a sad song, not a love song, but something in between. A song for those who stayed, and for those still trying to come back. It was a quiet Tuesday morning when Evelyn called. Jack was in the middle of tuning his guitar while Lila carefully cut smiley faces out of toast crusts at the kitchen table. He hesitated when he saw Evelyn's name flash on the screen. They hadn't spoken much since that night at the studio. They'd shared something raw, something fragile, and both of them seemed to need time to sit with it. He stepped onto the balcony and answered. Hey, he said. Hi, she replied, her voice clear, calm. Are you free this afternoon? I could be. What's up? I have something to ask. It's a bit out of the blue. Jack smiled faintly. That's becoming your specialty. She laughed quietly. Give me 15 minutes. I'll swing by. They met at a small cafe. Evelyn favored one with crooked chairs, chalkboard menus, and a barista who played Miles Davis when no one requested otherwise. She led Jack to a quiet corner table, her leather folder tucked under one arm, the other hand nursing a steaming cup of ginger tea. I'm going to Chicago for 3 months, she said as soon as they sat down. Jack blinked. Okay. I've accepted a consulting project. High impact, short term. It's something I care about, but I didn't want to leave the studio behind. Jack nodded slowly. So you're putting things on pause. No, she said. I'm asking you to step in while I'm gone. He stared at her. To run it, he asked. To guide it, she clarified. Jose will help, of course. He knows the ropes. But I need someone who understands why it exists. Someone who can inspire people to keep showing up. Jack leaned back. You're asking me to lead a music center. Evelyn smiled. I'm asking you to keep the heart of it beating. Jack rubbed a hand over his face. Evelyn, I don't know how to manage anything. I don't have a business degree. I don't even have a high school diploma that isn't crumpled in a drawer somewhere. You have lived experience, she said simply. You've raised a child through grief and grit. You've built trust on the sidewalk with nothing but a song. You've held a room full of people with your voice. That's the kind of leadership we need. Jack was quiet for a long time. What if I mess it up? Then we learn, she said. Together. That evening, Jack sat at the table while Lila doodled music notes on her homework folder. Do you think I could run a studio? He asked. Lila didn't look up. You already do. Jack raised a brow. What do you mean? She pointed to the corner of their tiny apartment where his guitar rested next to a small stack of papers, song lyrics, and sticky notes from kids who came to Saturday workshops. You make people feel better when they come around. You fix broken strings. You tell people their voice matters. That's a studio, right? Jack stared at her, stunned by the clarity of her answer. Lila popped a cracker in her mouth and said between chews, Besides, Evelyn believes in you. That's like mega rare. He laughed. Is it? She believes in people who don't believe in themselves. It's her superpower. The next morning, Jack met Evelyn at the studio. The building had begun to change. The old light fixtures had been replaced with warm Edison bulbs. Posters now lined the walls, some professional, some drawn by children. A bookshelf stood near the lobby filled with used sheet music, jazz biographies, and coffee-stained notebooks labeled Song Ideas. It felt lived in, real, and terrifying. Evelyn showed him a binder full of logistics schedules, contact lists, donor information security codes. Jack flipped through the pages, overwhelmed. She saw his expression and placed a hand over the folder. You won't be alone, she said. This place isn't about perfection. It's about presence. He nodded slowly. I don't know how to do this the right way, he admitted. There's no right way, she said gently. There's only your way. The following week came like a slow tide. Jack made announcements he never thought he'd make. He arranged practice sessions, worked with Jose to schedule weekend performances, and, most terrifying of all, sat down with teenagers who asked him real questions. How do you know if your song's good enough? What if no one listens? What if I forget the words halfway through? He answered the only way he knew how. You sing anyway. And they did. At first it was chaos. Forgotten lyrics, tangled chords, stage fright. But then came the laughter, the breakthroughs. A shy boy from the shelter sang a verse in Spanish. A girl with pink headphones choreographed a dance for her little sister's recital. And Jack, despite the weight of responsibility, started to feel something bloom inside him that had long gone dormant. Pride, not in himself, in them. Late one evening, as he cleaned up after a workshop, he found a note taped to the door of the sound booth. It was written in sharp pencil on the back of a flyer, Mr. Jack, thanks for listening to me. You didn't laugh when I forgot the chords. I didn't think grown-ups were like that. P.S. I want to be brave like you someday. D. He read the note twice, then folded it and slipped it into his wallet next to Evelyn's old $100 bill. That night, he sat with Lila on the couch, an arm around her as they watched an old music documentary. Do you think Mommy would be proud of me? He asked quietly. Lila didn't hesitate. She already is. Jack kissed the top of her head and held her close. Outside, the city hummed in late spring quiet. Inside, a man who once played only to survive now found himself playing to lead, to lift, to light the way for others. And though the studio was just a building old brick and faded wood, it had become something more. A place for voices to rise, a place for broken things to make music again. And, for Jack, maybe, a place to stay. For a while, everything held together. The studio thrived under Jack's care in a way no one, especially Jack, had expected. Word spread quickly about the ex-street musician who made space for nervous voices and untuned guitars. More kids signed up each week. Retired folks came to teach piano. Donations trickled in. Lila began helping with Saturday groups, carefully tuning ukuleles with her tongue sticking out in concentration. And yet, beneath the surface of all that good, a quiet pressure built. Jack hadn't meant to overextend, but he was wearing too many hats: mentor, janitor, father, event planner, teacher. He hadn't written a song in weeks. He hadn't played for himself in longer than that. Evelyn's absence, though planned and logical, felt heavier with each passing day. He missed her, more than he thought he would. And the part that frightened him most was how naturally she'd filled a space in his life that he hadn't realized was still hollow. It started with a small moment, nothing explosive. Lila asked if Evelyn was coming back soon. She'd drawn a welcome home card with stick figures of the three of them holding hands beneath a banner that read, "We missed you." Jack smiled at first, then said, "We'll see, kiddo." Lila's face fell, but she promised. She said 3 months, Jack replied. Plans change. Lila stared at him. "You don't want her to come back." Jack paused. "That's not what I said. You act weird when we talk about her." "I'm tired, Lila," he said too sharply. "Can we not do this right now?" Her eyes welled. "You always say that." She turned and stormed into her room, slamming the door behind her. Jack exhaled hard, sinking into the couch. He hadn't meant to shut her down, but he didn't know how to explain what was happening inside him, the fear, the longing, the rising sense that everything good was just one step away from collapsing again. That night the storm rolled in like an old enemy, fast, loud, uninvited. Wind whipped through the alleyways. Rain hammered the windows. And somewhere around 10 p.m., Jack realized Lila wasn't in bed. Panic hit instantly. He checked the bathroom. Empty. Kitchen nothing. Her room window was cracked, something she never did. He pulled on his boots and jacket, heart pounding in his chest. The rain stung his face as he sprinted outside, calling her name, fear rising with every unanswered echo. He ran through the streets near their building, then toward the park, soaked to the bone, yelling into the wind. Then he saw it. A small figure huddled beneath the playground, slide knees tucked to chest, soaking wet, clutching something in her arms. Jack ran. Lila. She didn't look up. He knelt beside her and saw what she was holding, a faded scarf. Her mother's. She'd gone out in the storm to get it from the donation box they kept near the studio. She must have remembered where he stored it, tucked away with old photos and keepsakes too painful to part with. "I didn't want you to forget her," Lila sobbed, "or forget us." Jack pulled her into his arms, wrapping his jacket around her small, shivering body. "Oh, baby girl, I could never forget. She was part of our music," Lila whispered, voice cracking. "Just like Evelyn is now. But you act like you don't care." Tears mingled with the rain on Jack's cheeks. "I'm scared," he admitted, holding her close. "Every time something good happens, I wait for it to disappear. I'm afraid of hoping too much." Lila sniffled. "But you told me we always try, even when it's hard." He let out a small broken laugh. "Guess I needed to hear that back." They got home, changed into dry clothes, and sat on the floor with mugs of warm milk and blankets around their shoulders. Jack looked at her truly, looked at her not just as his daughter, but as this extraordinary little soul who kept finding her way through grief and uncertainty with more courage than he often could muster. "You were right," he said softly. "Evelyn's become part of us, and I miss her." Lila nodded solemnly. "So tell her." Jack blinked. "What if she doesn't feel the same? Then at least you'll know," Lila said. "You always tell me the truth matters more than being safe." He smiled. "When did you get so wise?" She shrugged. "Probably from all the books you make me read." They both laughed, the kind of laugh that shakes something loose inside you. The next morning, Jack stood outside the studio early. The storm passed, the city washed clean. He looked up at the sign, "Create Again," and took a deep breath. Then he walked inside, picked up his guitar, and wrote a new song. Not a song of fear, not a song of grief, but one of return, of reckoning, of love that risks being named. And when he finished the last note, he looked at Lila sitting cross-legged on the stage. "What should we call it?" he asked. She thought for a moment. Then said, "The Girl in the Rain." Jack nodded, eyes stinging. "That's exactly right." The storm had passed, but its echo lingered in the puddles along the curb, in the scent of wet concrete, and in the silence between Jack and Lila the next morning. He'd promised her waffles, so he made them, pouring the batter a little thicker, slicing bananas like he remembered her mother used to do. Lila ate quietly, legs swinging under the table, the scarf her mother's scarf folded neatly beside her plate. Jack watched her and knew some words had to be spoken aloud, no matter how vulnerable they felt. "Lila," he said, placing his coffee down. "I need you to know something." She looked up expectant. "I love your mom. I always will. That part of our story, that's forever. But Evelyn, she's become something different. Not a replacement, just another light. A new song in the same melody." Lila's eyes glistened, but she smiled. "I think Mom would like her." Jack swallowed hard. "Yeah, I think so too." He didn't waste time. After walking Lila to school, he returned home and sat with his phone in his hand for 15 minutes before working up the courage to text. "Can we talk? I've been holding back too long." He hit send. Less than a minute later, the 3 dots appeared. Then a reply, "I'm flying in tonight. Can I see you?" Jack stared at the screen, pulse racing. After everything, she was coming back. He texted back, "I'll be here." Then, against every instinct that told him to keep it safe and simple, he added, "We both will." The hours passed slowly. Jack cleaned the apartment like a man possessed, vacuuming corners that hadn't been touched in years, organizing shelves, scrubbing the stovetop. Lila helped, humming to herself and taping her handmade "Welcome Back Evelyn" sign to the front door. As the sky turned amber with early evening light, Jack slipped on a clean shirt and buttoned the cuffs carefully. Lila chose a dress with sunflowers and insisted on brushing her own hair, though it ended in an uneven braid. By the time the knock came, Jack's heart was in his throat. He opened the door. Evelyn stood there, suitcase in hand, eyes tired from travel but unmistakably radiant. A little windblown, a little unsure but smiling. And when she saw Lila standing beside the "Welcome Back" sign, her hand flew to her chest. "Oh, we missed you," Lila said softly. Evelyn stepped forward and knelt down, embracing the little girl with a tenderness that wasn't new but had deepened. "I missed you too, Sunshine," Evelyn whispered. Then she stood, eyes meeting Jack's. "I think we need to talk," she said gently. Jack nodded. "Come in." They sat at the kitchen table, just the 2 of them. Lila quietly disappeared into her room, understanding with the intuition only children possess that some moments require distance. Evelyn reached into her bag and pulled out a small envelope. "I wrote this on the plane," she said, "but I think I need to say it instead." Jack leaned forward. "I left because I believed in you," she began. "And I stayed away longer than I should have because I didn't trust myself not to fall apart." His brow furrowed. "Fall apart." "I built a life around control, Jack, around keeping everything polished and untouchable. You unraveled that without even trying, because you live so raw and true." Her voice wavered. It terrified me, but it also made me want to be brave. Jack reached across the table, gently taking her hand. "I'm terrified too," he said. "Every time something good comes close, I feel like it'll vanish, like I'll mess it up." "You haven't," she said, eyes shining. "You've built something beautiful, with Lila, with the studio, with yourself." He was quiet for a moment. "I want more, Evelyn," he said softly. "Not just the studio, not just late-night talks and weekend projects. I want something real. With you." She looked down at their joined hands. "And what if I can't promise perfect?" Jack gave a half laugh. "Perfect's never lived here, but real, that I can work with." She looked up, a tear slipping down her cheek. "I love you," she said simply. It wasn't grand, it wasn't dramatic, it was honest. Jack leaned forward, kissed her gently, and said, "I love you too." They stepped out onto the balcony a few minutes later, where Lila sat reading by the glow of a lantern. She looked up, saw their joined hands, and broke into a grin. "So," she said, already teasing, "are we like a band now?" Jack laughed. "Only if you're the lead singer." Lila gave a dramatic bow. "Obviously." Evelyn looked at them both, her heart full in a way it hadn't been for years. Not since before the heartbreak. Not since before the silence. She had walked away from music, once walked away from the girl she'd been. But tonight, under a quiet Portland sky, beside the man who once sang her back to life and the little girl who held them both in her joy. She finally came home. Not to a place, but to a song she thought she'd lost. And this time it had 3 voices. The studio was humming with life. It had been Evelyn's idea, an open mic celebration to relaunch the space officially. But it felt less like an event and more like a homecoming. String lights crisscrossed the rafters, casting a golden warmth over the rows of mismatched chairs. Hand-drawn posters and Polaroids lined the walls. A table in the back overflowed with brownies, lemon bars, and paper cups filled with lemonade and lukewarm coffee. Everyone who had touched the place, students, volunteers, parents, strangers turned family, was there. They had come not just for music, but for something quieter belonging. Backstage, Jack stared at his guitar fingertips, tapping lightly on its neck. His set was the closing one of the night by Evelyn's very intentional design. He'd argued, of course, saying someone younger, newer, should have that honor. But she'd only smiled and said, "No one deserves to close this story more than the man who started it." He'd tried to laugh it off, but inside the truth echoed deeper than pride. This place, these people, Evelyn, Lila, they weren't just part of his life anymore. They were his life. Daddy. He turned and found Lila peeking through the curtain. She wore her sunflower dress again, though it was starting to get a little small, and a wide, nervous smile. "You ready?" she asked. He knelt beside her. "Are you?" She held up a crumpled lyric sheet. "Only if I get to do the second verse." Jack laughed. "Deal. Are you going to tell them the story?" He hesitated. "You think I should?" Lila nodded seriously. "They need to know. It's not just a song. It's the song." Jack looked at her for a long moment. Then he kissed her forehead and whispered, "You're braver than I ever was." The MC finished announcing the last intermission, and the crowd quieted as the lights dimmed slightly. Then Evelyn stepped onto the stage. Her presence wasn't flashy. She didn't need it to be. She carried herself with quiet command, strong but full of grace. The kind of person who didn't take the spotlight but still became its source. "Thank you all for being here tonight," she said. This studio was built not just with wood and wires, but with memories, with grief, with healing, with hope. She paused, eyes scanning the crowd. And tonight, the person closing our show is someone many of you know. Some of you met him on a sidewalk. Others met him here giving you time belief, and sometimes the last muffin on the snack table. He taught us that music doesn't have to be perfect. It just has to be true. Then she smiled. Please welcome Jack Morrison and someone very special joining him tonight. The crowd applauded, and then Jack stepped out, guitar in hand, with Lila right beside him. The moment their feet hit the stage, the room stilled. Jack approached the microphone and adjusted it slowly. "I wasn't going to speak," he began. "But someone very wise," he glanced at Lila, "told me that sometimes the story matters just as much as the song." He took a breath. 25 years ago, I stood on a street corner in Seattle on New Year's Eve and played a song into the cold. No one seemed to notice. I was just a kid with a guitar and a broken heart. But what I didn't know was that someone did hear me, someone who needed that song to keep going. He paused, his gaze falling gently on Evelyn, sitting near the front row. She didn't blink. She didn't look away. She found me again last fall. She didn't just remind me of who I was. She showed me who I could become. A hush fell deeper over the room. And now I want to sing that song again. This time not just for survival, but for connection, for healing, for love. He turned to Lila. "Take us in." She nodded, her fingers trembling slightly as she stepped to the second mic. Jack strummed the first chords of "You Are Not Alone." The room breathed with them. It wasn't showy, it wasn't technically perfect, but it was raw. And it was real. Jack's voice rose in that familiar husky tone weathered by time, strengthened by loss. Then came Lila's sweet, clear, and impossibly steady. The contrast was breathtaking. Where his voice bore scars, hers carried sunlight. Halfway through, Jack's throat tightened. His hands slowed. Lila reached out and placed her fingers on the neck of his guitar, steadying it. He looked down at her. She smiled and kept singing. The room was silent, not out of politeness but reverence. By the final verse, Jack joined in again. Side by side, they sang the words that had once saved a life, and now perhaps saved his. When the song ended, there was no immediate applause, just stillness, people wiping eyes, breathing carefully. Then a wave of claps, cheers, standing ovation, not just for the music, for the journey, for the full circle moment. Jack stepped back from the mic, overcome. He looked at Evelyn. She mouthed, "Thank you." He mouthed back, "You saved me, too." Backstage, Evelyn wrapped her arms around both Jack and Lila. "You were amazing," she said. "Both of you." Jack laughed softly, still catching his breath. "I've never been so scared. But you did it anyway." He nodded. "That's what Lila taught me." Evelyn looked at Lila. "And what did you learn?" Lila beamed. That sometimes when you sing with someone, you don't feel scared anymore. Later that night, after the last chairs were stacked and the last cookie crumbs swept, Jack stood on the stage alone. The lights were dim. The room echoed with absence. But he didn't feel alone. He looked out at the empty chairs and whispered, "You sang to me in 1999. Then, with a quiet smile, he added, "Tonight, I finally sang back." The spring rain had given way to one of those rare Portland mornings where everything felt touched by gold. The streets glistened. The air was cool but forgiving, and the cherry blossoms held their petals like a promise. Inside the studio, the soft hum of new beginnings stirred with the sound of guitar strings being tuned, soft laughter from the corner, where two teenage girls practiced harmonies and the rhythmic beat of someone discovering drums for the first time. It had been 1 month since the open mic. The little studio on Hawthorne had become more than a place to play music. It had become a sanctuary for children, figuring out who they were for retirees, rediscovering joy for strangers, finding the courage to raise their voice. People called it the Heart Note, after one of the songs Jack and Lila had written together. But those who knew the truth simply called it home. Jack stood near the back wall where a new photo collage had begun to take shape, snapshots from classes' open mics, weekend cleanup crews, and quiet moments of breakthrough. In the center was a black and white photo, a younger Jack 20 years ago, guitar slung over his shoulder, singing into the night on a Seattle sidewalk. Next to it, a newer photo, him on stage beside Lila, their voices joined the caption beneath reading, "The Song That Came Back." He felt a tap on his shoulder and turned to see Jose, clipboard in hand, and a grin already forming. "Do you have a minute?" Jack nodded. "There's someone here to meet you. He says he found your name in the flyer from last month and came a long way." Curious, Jack followed him to the front of the studio. A tall man with a military haircut and kind eyes stood waiting, holding a guitar case worn down in a way Jack recognized instantly. "You're Jack Morrison?" the man asked. "I am. I just wanted to thank you. For this place. My daughter, she hasn't spoken much since her mom passed. But last night she wrote a song. Said she wanted to sing it here. Said this place felt like it listened." Jack felt a lump in his throat. "I'm honored." The man smiled, eyes misty. "It's more than music. You're giving people a way back to themselves." As the man turned to find his daughter, Jack stood still, letting the moment wash over him. He had no words, only gratitude. Outside, Evelyn stood on the curb watching the sun cut through drifting clouds. She wore jeans and a blazer, hair loose around her shoulders, her phone tucked away for once. Jack stepped out beside her, a to-go coffee in each hand. "I figured you'd need this," he said, handing her the one with the little cinnamon heart drawn on the lid. She smiled, took a sip, and sighed contentedly. You really do know me now. I'm a fast learner." They stood in companionable silence for a moment, watching people come and go through the studio doors. "How's the new project shaping up?" he asked. "Good," she said. "I'll fly out for 1 week next month. But after that," she turned to him, "I want to be here. Not just physically, I mean fully." He nodded slowly. "Me too." She looked at him for a long moment. "You know, I used to think I needed to rebuild my old life, fix everything that broke. But you taught me something different." Jack raised an eyebrow. "Oh yeah, what's that?" "That healing doesn't mean going back. It means building forward with whatever's still standing." Jack looked down the street where Lila was skipping toward them with 2 cupcakes in hand, one slightly squished from the journey. "She's still standing," he said softly. "And so are you," Evelyn replied. They smiled. And in that smile something unspoken passed between them. A quiet agreement. A vow not made of words but of presence, patience, and the kind of love that doesn't rush to be named. That evening, as golden hour painted the city, the 3 of them, Jack, Evelyn, and Lila, sat in the studio's main room. Jack strummed his guitar. Gently, no song in particular, just chords floating like light on water. Evelyn read aloud from a worn book of poetry, while Lila curled beside her humming absently and drawing a new logo for the studio on the back of a flyer. At one point, Jack began to sing low, unpolished warm. Evelyn joined in. Then Lila. 3 voices different but harmonized. Not perfect but whole. Outside, a few early stars blinked into view. Inside, something eternal glowed in quiet corners. A once struggling single father. A woman who'd once stood at the edge of ending. A little girl who believed in songs and the people who sang them. They didn't chase big dreams anymore. They lived a small one that grew day by day. A song that had once saved someone had become a home for many. And as the last chord faded into the stillness of night, Jack smiled to himself, whispered something only the walls could hear. "You sang to me in 1999. Tonight, we sang for the world, and the world finally was listening." We'd love to know where you're watching from. Drop your city or country in the comments below so we can see how far these stories are traveling. If this story touched your heart, don't forget to subscribe and turn on notifications so you never miss another one. Thank you so much for spending your time with us today. Until next time, stay kind, stay hopeful, and keep listening for the music in unexpected places.